Wednesday, and one of the great things that I love about the United States of America is we are always in a position to question how we can live up to the ideals of the United States of America more and more. And I'm really, really excited about being a part of this conversation, particularly for those of you that are really strong and dedicated advocates for issues of gifted education. So with that, I want to hop right in to make sure that we can really dive into these topics. I'll be taking a glance over at the Facebook page. So if those of you on the Facebook page want to just say hello, let us know where you're joining us in from, what district you're in, what state, if you're coming from out of Colorado, and what your role is in education. Please share that so that we can understand what we're dealing with. Now, just so you all can kind of keep in touch with me, please know that my email address is colin@thinkLaw.us. And if you want to follow along on Twitter, follow me at thinkLawUS on Twitter or Colin E. Seale. So let's hop right into this. And know that if you want to kind of dig deeper into some of these topics and content areas, you can follow the Think Law podcast. We release a new podcast every Wednesday. And then the Thinking Like a Lawyer book, which I'll be talking about a little bit as we talk through this presentation. So here's kind of why I am here. A lot of my life comes down to this idea that when I was in Brooklyn, New York, I grew up there and I was in this space where I was the first generation of my family born in this country. I was, in many ways, the kid who a lot of us really think about and are concerned about. Because for me, I was on free and reduced lunch. We were in this struggle. My father was actually incarcerated for a decade for selling drugs. So when I start to think about what made me special as an elementary school student, if you look at this picture, it clearly wasn't my 90s sweater game because everybody kind of had the same super cool 90s sweater game. You might say, well, Colin, you had some very interesting high waters. I would notice that your mom possibly put you in capris. I don't know when the flood was coming, but when the flood came, I was going to be ready. But what really stuck out about this experience was I was bused to this school because my neighborhood didn't have a gifted and talented program. And in this school, if you look at this, you can see that this says 4th/5th grade. So even though the average classroom had over 30 kids, my classroom only had 12 per grade level that were part of this transformational program. And when I say transformational, I want to be real with you. The same kind of behavior I used to get in trouble for was now required. Do y'all hear what I'm saying? The same behavior I used to get in trouble for was now required. So now when I'm questioning the teacher, it wasn't defiant or me being disrespectful. It was curious. Colin's so inquisitive. When I was getting out of my seat and talking to my friends, it wasn't disrupting the class or being belligerent. It was collaborating. So when we start realizing what's at stake here, we've got to understand that genius is distributed equally, but so often opportunity is not. So as we think about that opportunity, and those of you that are in this chat, thank you so much for introducing yourself and bringing this in, because I know a lot of you care about this opportunity. Because what I look at in this picture is genius that we left on the table. How did we leave it on the table? Well, 3 of the kids in this picture did not finish high school. Not graduate school, not college, high school. So you're talking about kids that are bused to a school because of their brilliance. Isolated in this separate but unequal educational experience that I just told you was transformational. And 3 didn't finish high school. So here I am at this point now as a grown-up, okay? I have my own family. So my wife is a professor at Arizona State University. My daughter is 7 years old, skipped over the 1st grade. You can probably tell who runs my household. My son Oliver is 4 years old. His favorite word used to be actually, now it's technically. Y'all know, you know this kid? Have y'all met Oliver before? Technically. But when I look at this family structure, I'm always bewildered that I've been able to come to this point where not only do I have this family that's blossoming and grooming, but I've been able to get my degree in computer science and teach math in DC and in Las Vegas and get to the point where, I practiced law while teaching math or went to law school graduated top of my class, practiced law, and then I started thinkLaw. So thinkLaw is an organization now where we teach critical thinking using legal cases for older kids. We use fairy tales and nursery rhymes for younger kids because, let's not lie, there's a lot of shady characters in children's stories. A whole lot of shady characters. Don't even get me started on Goldilocks. Don't even get me started on Goldilocks, right? But when I start thinking about this, when I start realizing that for kids like me, the story is so often exception to the rule. That can't be the case. If I care about justice, if I care about fairness, if I care about equity, stories like mine can't be an exception to the rule. We got to create a space where all kids have a real shot at pursuing excellence. Well, what does that look like? Let's talk about this. Let's actually break down what this looks like. And as we talk about this, I want to be really clear with you all. Test scores are something we should think about. Okay, and let me just kind of ask you all. Y'all mostly are in Colorado, okay? In Colorado, 8th grade test scores. What would y'all predict? Like you might know, or forget about 8th grade test scores. Like 3rd through 8th. What do you think average these kids are doing in ELA and in math? Right? Do the breakdown ELA math. 50% proficient, 50% proficient. Like, what do y'all think? Throw it in the chat. What do you think your guesses are on how y'all are doing on your 3rd through 8th averages on ELA and math statewide? And don't cheat and look stuff up. Just want to get your gut feeling. I want to see where y'all are at. So as we're guessing about what this inequity looks like, I want to be clear with you all that when it comes to 8th grade, a lot of the biggest, most populous states are barely finding 50% proficiency. If we look at Colorado, we're under 50% proficiency for 3rd grade through 8th grade average altogether. And this is based off of the 2019 scores. So like, you might say, well, it's a test, tests are flawed, whatever have you. All right, tests are flawed. Okay, agreed, fine. But let me talk to you about testing. Because right now we're talking about tests, but we're not even talking about like the gaps. And I'm kind of sick of the gaps. I've seen these graphs. Let me ask y'all a question, okay? And if you can chime in on the Facebook chat, I'd love to sort of hear your feedback on this. A question, Family Feud style, all right? Family Feud style. If we surveyed 100 Colorado teachers and we asked them, why is it that there are so many persistent gaps that exist between white, affluent, or at least non-low SES, and pick your category, Black, ELL, low SES, native, like, why do we have these gaps that continue to persist? Please let me see your thoughts. What will be the #1 answer? We're playing Family Feud as to why these gaps persist. Would love to see your thoughts on this. Some people blame structural racism. Some people blame a lot of issues around, kids not being prepared enough, or, a lack of school funding, Sarah shared, because that can always be an issue that we look at. Sometimes it's just, okay, the tests are flawed. So the reason this is set up is because the tests are flawed, okay? So we start recognizing that this is the case, that we got these issues. And I want to ask you another question, okay? Like another question. So we talk funding, we talked about flawed tests, we talk about all these other issues. One more game of Family Feud, one more round, lightning round. If we were to ask you a question now as teachers, what is your biggest frustration with test prep? What is the biggest frustration that y'all have with test prep as educators? Why does test prep feel like it's just bastardizing the profession? Like, I'm better than this. You got me over here doing this test prep. You're ruining the purity of the job. Like, what is wrong with test prep? Why does it make us so frustrated as educators to have to prepare our kids for these standardized tests? I know some people talking here about like access to high quality instruction, and we end up spending so much time on the testing that it's like it takes away from the actual instruction, possibly. Any other thoughts about test prep? Because I'll tell you something about test prep. I'll tell you something when it comes to me, right? People say it's memorization, it's not learning. Like, I get all of that, but I'm going to tell you something. It's hard for me to separate test, outcomes, and equity. And I would say that for a lot of us that say things like, well, tests are like, you just teach to the test or whatever have you. I don't believe that that's true with today's set of exams. Right? I spent a lot of time looking at Colorado's assessment. I look at assessments, a lot of other tests. A lot of these tests are not tests you can just memorize and just go through using rote memorization. You got to think on your toes. They're tricky. The questions are asked in weird sort of ways. And like, here's my thing about test prep. And I actually talk about this in this one article that is in the 74. Like, you take a kid like me, who's born to a family who's the first generation. We've got no wealth. We've got no like special people that can like vouch for us and give us access to things. All we can possibly do is like work hard and do whatever else is left outside of working hard. And what's unfair about our society is that for a lot of kids that grow up like me, who look like me, we still live in a world where we have to work twice as hard to get half as far. Can I talk to you about what that actually means with using a very personal story? So I taught math. When I moved to Vegas, I worked in child welfare. I knew a lot of people. I went back to school. I went to law school at night while teaching during the day. And guess what? I was the #1 ranked student in law school. I was on the Law Journal. I did all the things. I got 13 interviews for on-campus interviews for the top firms in town. 13 interviews as the #1 student with the best resume, going into these places and whatever have you. Like, you know how many job offers I got? 1. Despite being the most credentialed applicant out of all these other applicants I went to school with, I got 1. And how did I get that 1? Because I knew an attorney in another office who was able to vouch for me. So even with all the credentials that I had, I was passed on. Mind you, there were kids that got interviews that were not in the top 10% because their dad who used to work with so-and-so or their father or their mom owned this business down the street that was a partner with the firm. So like, if we care about equity, we cannot ignore these results. Can I go even further? Can I go even further? Can we talk about gifted education for a second? My daughter talks a lot of smack. She really does. She talks a lot of smack. So like last week, you know, I pull up something and she sees this thing. She's like, oh, Dad, like, you know, your book is #5 in gifted education. That's cool. And she even was talking smack. I'm like, oh, how many books did you sell? Like 650? Oh, 650. Like around the world? Like, that's it? I'm like, girl, if you don't get out of my face, why don't you write a book and talk about, oh, that's it, around the world. But anyhow, I started looking. I'm like, if I'm #5, what else is going on in these rest of these books? And I'm like, all right, well, like, I obviously it can't beat the damn unicorns. These unicorns are unstoppable. And I actually saw my wife bought this book. I'm like, you're sleeping with the enemy. I can't believe you about the unicorn book for our daughter, but whatever. But here's what's interesting, right? Like test prep, we don't like it. A test prep is not whatever have you. Let me tell you what's happening. Let me tell you what's happening. You see the rest of this? When I look through the top 25, top 30 books, I'm noticing CAGT test prep, specialized high school exam for New York test prep, CAGT test prep, Common Core test prep, test prep, test prep, test prep, test prep, test prep. So like this leveling up that's happening. And we start talking about equity and outcomes and opportunities. I don't know how we can separate this, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know how we can look at this and say like somehow we can just not do the job of making sure that all kids have a shot at leveling up. Because that's what equity really looks like. That outcome needs to be a part of it. So if you want to see kids like me, who at one point in life had to live in a 1-bedroom apartment with 9 people, including my grandmother, have a chance at success, you better believe that that's tied to making sure I have access to excellent opportunities that are going to over-prepare me. Because it's not enough for me to be proficient. I got to be at the mastery level. I gotta be unquestionably qualified for everything. I have to wear my credentials on my forehead like a tattoo. So you better make sure I get those credentials. Because you know what? If you care about educational's power to transform intergenerational poverty, that means we care about nurses. We care about getting kids to be engineers, to be doctors, to be lawyers, even to be teachers. And guess what? There are tests for those things. So we can't talk about testing as if it's some sort of pariah. Because the reality is there's different kids out here. There's kids that are upper class, affluent, that they might not need to be super successful on tests. But our kids need to be unquestionably talented, unquestionably proficient, and need to be able to carry those credentials on their forehead. All right. So when I talk about this, a lot of times my preparation is around a bigger picture. Because it's not just academic success. is this idea that we need critical thinkers now more than ever. Let's be real. This pandemic has led us to understand that people are out there. They are wild. Wild. Like, we need critical thinkers in our society like never before. And when I say critical thinking, I'm talking about a combination of two different things. I'm talking about this idea of being able to do these different skills, the ability to infer, the ability to analyze, even the ability to think about your own thinking. But it's not just skills. We're also talking about the habits and mindsets of critical thinking. How likely is it that you're going to apply critical thinking throughout your life, academics, and career? I think you all know what I'm talking about, because you either teach a child or know a child who is unquestionably brilliant, but find some way to do the dumbest stuff you ever heard of. If you know or teach that child, please say, I know this person, in the chat. Please make it clear that you know who this person is. And if you don't know this person, then you might actually be that adult. And that's all good too. So here's the thing. The difference between knowing better and doing better is often explained by having the skills, but lacking those dispositions. We also need to make sure that we do this in a way that transforms across contexts. Okay, it's not enough for a kid to be like, oh, I'm not a math person and whatever have you. We've got to have kids that are flexible and adaptable and can do a wide variety of things for our quickly changing world. On top of that, I want to talk about another reality. We are at a moment of anti-intellectualism like I've never seen before. Anti-intellectualism like I've never seen before. What's going on? Well, I think a big part of it is so many of our public intellectuals are just not nice people. It's not enough for them to be smart. They got to make sure that you know that you're stupid. And I think about this story about one day I'm doing dishes and I'm talking to my daughter, and this story isn't a Thinking Like a Lawyer book. Like, I'm doing dishes. I'm like, hey, Rose, can you pass me a cup? She's like, Dad, there's no cup. She's sitting at the table. I'm like, Rose, like, the cup is right there. Can you pass me the cup? She's like, Dad, there's no cup. I see a glass though. Man, I stopped doing the dishes right away. I'm like, listen to me. You're not going to be one of those people who knows exactly what I'm talking about. You find some minor technicality and you want to like make me feel stupid. Because you do stuff like that, you're not going to have any friends. And I say that and I'm like, kind of dramatic. But at what point do we come to realize that maybe our kids need to explicitly understand that doing right is more important than being right? Imagine a world if our most brilliant intellectual leaders understood that doing right was more important than being right. If you want to drop an amen or a hallelujah in the chat, please feel free to do so, because this is an amen and a hallelujah moment if I've never seen one before, okay? Doing right is more important than being right. So as we think about this framework for critical thinking and giving kids access to this framework as part of what education is supposed to do so that they can be future ready to tackle what we're bringing to these challenges they're going to face in the world, this is where this whole Thinking Like a Lawyer model came up, where I thought, man, like, this would be such an incredible way to think about the way that we approach this world. And moreover, when I start realizing this space, when I start realizing, like, wait a minute, college isn't for everybody. Well, let's stop saying that for a second, because who is college not for exactly? And if I actually pour into the data, and in my Forbes column, I actually have an article where I go through this. Like, if you look at the numbers for these same kids that traditionally lack access, college is a game changer. Yes, we got to make sure we fund college right. We got to make sure our kids aren't taking on crazy debt and really struggling and all that stuff. But like, if they get their college degree, the percentage increase in earnings literally still pays. So why are we saying things like college isn't for everyone, when for our minoritized populations, it is something that's going to make such a dynamic difference in their lives? I'm going to go even further. Speaking about life, it's literally an issue of life or death. A lot of us are in a position where we're working from home. Well, it turns out that unless you're a doctor or some essential worker that's highly educated, which is not as many, having a college degree makes it much more likely that you're able to work from home. Over half of college educated people are able to work from home. And if you want to get a copy of like a little handout for this presentation, if you text the word think to 66866 and respond with your email, I'll be able to make sure that you get that and some other goodies to keep in touch as well. So text the word think to 66866 so you can get some of this stuff. And remember, you can tweet along at Colin Seale at thinkLaw US. I'm about to wrap up, But I want to just get back to this point where I bring up this slide and I talk about this idea of leaving genius on the table. And I want to make it clear that I was almost the fourth person to not graduate from high school. When I look back at my high school pictures, it's kind of crazy. Like, I was in this struggle mode, even though in 8th grade, I was like National Honor Society, double accelerated in 2 subjects. All of a sudden, I caught I don't care syndrome. And I knew I caught it because in every picture I looked at in 9th and 10th grade, I had the same pose. I wasn't a rapper. I wasn't like posing for an album cover. This was just my face. I didn't care. I had 80 absences. I was cutting classes almost every day. The only class I made effort in was lunch. I was on the honor roll for lunch. I took all 4 lunches. I was so passionate about lunch. So when I start thinking about I don't care syndrome and getting out of this piece, I want to be clear that like making sure that kids like me and kids I went to school with and kids all over this country, kids all over Colorado really have access, we've got to make sure that we pave that path as part of this conversation around racial justice. Racial justice cannot stop with this idea of like just thinking through like making sure we go to implicit bias trainings, whatever have you. The academic achievement has to be a piece of it as well, because I realized something. And this part, I'm going to probably take 3 or 4 more minutes, and it might take more because this part is hard for me to get through. Like emotionally, it is hard for me to get through this. I realized when I got older that maybe it wasn't just me. Like as a gifted child who went to a specialized high school I had to take a test to get into, who was clearly qualified to be there. I went to Bronx High School of Science. Neil deGrasse Tyson went to my high school. Like, I'm a Black kid sitting there, you know, I'm supposed to be there, and I wasn't doing any work and nobody really seemed to care. And I always wondered, like, why did nobody seem to care? I got older. I got into education research. I started doing more work in gifted and talented. And this is from a book, from a model. And it's not an old book, it's a recent book on underachieving gifted children. And if you look at this model, what do you notice about the face of underachieving gifted children? Do you see what I see? I don't see me. I don't see me, so I'm invisible. And not only am I invisible, I wonder if I'm actually like loved. I'm wondering, is it possible to be Black and brilliant at the same time? Is it possible to be Black or to be brown and brilliant at the same time and to be loved for it? Can you be loved for it? Because I have a colleague here in Arizona who's at the cabinet level in her district. And she has a very interesting award up in her office. Because when she was in 4th grade in one of the most prestigious gifted programs in our state, she got this award at the end of the year from a teacher that all of her fellow classmates signed. And she got the award for asking the most stupidest questions. All of her classmates signed it. And she got it in a public ceremony in her classroom. And I realized that, like, as a huge fan of hip hop, who I love Nas, I love Jay-Z, I love the Notorious B.I.G., all 3 of my favorite rappers like dropped out of high school. And I thought about this moment. I thought about this idea that Biggie Smalls, right before his first album, he got signed on Bad Boy Records with Puff Daddy, and his first single is coming out. And on the first single, the first set of words he echoes after reaching the pinnacle of success, mind you, he, like me, is the first generation in his family. His mom is from Jamaica. Like, he sold drugs. He made it from the bottom to the top. Like, he is here. He's made it. You know, the first set of lyrics he wrote, the first thing he said on that album, the music starts, the very first thing he says, he wanted to dedicate this album to the teachers that told him he would never amount to nothing. So we're not just leaving genius on the table. We are crushing souls. We are crushing souls. So when I talk about equity as academic success, I want to realize that there's another Biggie lyric that really stands out to me. In one song, he says, "My mind's my 9, my pen's my Mac 10. It's power. When you take kids like me and you invest in my brain, it's dangerous. Like, we can change things. We can break systems. We can create justice. We can make things happen. We can be the most creative, intuitive sort of minds that our society is longing for." Maybe that's why it's so scary. Maybe that's why we get an award for like asking the most stupidest questions and we feel pushed out of school. We feel like we don't belong. So let's do this a little bit differently. As we start thinking about racial justice, as districts across the country are focusing on racial justice, I want to be clear. Like all these things are important, right? Like I would argue that implicit bias is probably less important than explicit bias because there's a lot of explicit bias that we're not calling out enough in our education circles. I think it's important that our kids get access to diverse books that look like them, but I also think it's important that teachers understand how to teach in a way that makes kids be the center and kids do the heavy lifting in their own learning. So there's that power shift even in the classroom. So like, I think trauma-informed education is important, but I also think it's important that educators understand that like, what you call trauma, some of our kids call Tuesday. I don't need you to like talk down to me. I need to still be challenged. Don't traumatize me even further by denying me access to rigorous academic opportunities. So as we start realizing this, with this whole Black Lives Matters movement being more and more accepted across the country and folks recognizing that we're at this moment of racial justice reckoning, I'm like, you know what? We really want to reckon, we really want to move forward, then stop killing us can't be the motto. Because I don't think I'm okay with just surviving. I want to thrive. So if Black lives matter, if brown lives matter, if immigrants' lives matter, if trans lives matter, then our brains have to matter too. So when I think about educational equity, I always look at it as this equation. It's got to be both. It can't be one or the other. It has to be both. It has to be inclusive. And tomorrow at 3 p.m. Colorado time, I'm actually hosting a special book signing for the Thinking Like a Lawyer book. If you go to our website, thinkLaw.us, you can sign up. But we're going to be pouring into this in a little bit more detail so that you can check this out as well. And if you wanted to, just check it out, thinkLaw.us, you can drop it in the chat and you can check this out and be a part of this. That would be something that can allow you to just register, and it's free and it's open to anyone. So last but not least, I want to be clear with you all. We get to a point where people tell these stories of like, wow, Colin, like you grew up in poverty and you had the mean streets of Brooklyn and your father was locked up for selling drugs. And despite all that, I'm like, oh, stop right there. Stop right there. And don't you dare talk about despite. Because you don't get to strip me from my joy. My life was not this pain and suffering and struggle. I was poor without a whole lot of awareness that I was poor because I felt rich. Do you know why I felt rich? Because before I sat in law school classrooms, I was able to experience sessions with the philosophers of my time. Going to the Black barbershop in my community. Seeing them make these arguments backed up with claims and evidence and so many awesome public speaking skills that I would later use in my own public speaking. They were debating about which NFL team was the best and politics and which women were the prettiest in movies, and it didn't matter. But the demand for evidence mattered. And then when I look at this idea of thinking through my basketball court and looking at like this idea that even playing basketball, was that a foul? Was that not a foul? They were going back and forth. They demanded evidence. So it's because of this that I became who I am. So we're about to ask some questions right now. So please get ready to get your questions into the chat. I saw one about favorite books featuring kids of color, and I will get to that. But if we know we can't do this without our racial justice plan, let's make sure we have the plan, and let's make sure that the plan is inclusive of not just racial justice, but also academic success. Which means, hear what I'm saying right now, it means that like the physical logistics of how we're gonna do COVID-19 education, that is a given, right? We gotta figure all that out. But even as we're figuring that out, this still needs to be centered. This still needs to be centered as part of it. So again, please do follow along. Please do register for the book signing that I'm doing tomorrow. Text THINK to 66866 to be a part of my mailing list. Podcast episode comes out tomorrow, and please also do keep in touch. My book can be purchased on Amazon. I'll drop the link there for a second, but I will start taking questions right now as well. So I'm going to start with the question about favorite books for kids of color. So honestly, today, kids are lucky. Today, there are so many more books than they were growing up. I don't even know where to start. I feel like it really depends on what your kid is into. If your kid is into sci-fi, There's actually sci-fi that features kids of color. If your kid is into like athletics and, books like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, like there's other books that are like similar to that. It sucks that we don't have like the libraries open in some communities and we still have this pandemic going on, but I've been really happy, even here in Arizona, just walking around libraries and saying, hey, I'm looking for some really awesome books featuring kids of color for my 4-year-old and my 7-year-old. Can you help me out? And there are so many. And I would say, even if you don't have kids of color, everyone should be exposed to more stories about people of color because that's how we open up our minds, right? So make sure that you take advantage of those resources. I mean, there's so many book lists that are being curated right now because of this moment of reckoning that we are at. I know Jason Reynolds does some stuff that are great books to take a look at. But my kids kind of have their own taste in books, and it's sort of beyond me. They're pretty like rabid readers, and they just kind of do what they want when it comes to that. But there's a lot of options. As we're sort of closing out, and I'm waiting for more questions to come in, I want to point out something else. When it comes to gifted education, a lot of you all that might be parents of gifted learners, you might look at this and say, well, my kid is in a gifted program, we're good. But let's be real. Budget cuts are happening. Revenue gaps are very, very real. And when people are looking to make cuts, where are they going to make cuts to? For a lot of folks still in 2020, they look at gifted ed and the gifted kids are going to be just fine. When in reality, this pandemic has showed us we need to do more for brilliance. And we need to start thinking about how do we broaden the conversation around the importance of gifted education. One of the things that I think we do wrong is we talk about gifted education as this sort of on the margin sort of issue of gifted education for gifted children and parents of gifted children. Let's go a little bit deeper. And this is the thing. So I got this comment from E. Marissa Powell, what's our move? This is the move that I'm talking about. So how long have we been talking about achievement gap? How long have we been talking about, the opportunity gap and, how many kids are underperforming, whatever have you? What if we said, we know that gifted education is designed to train instructors to tap into the brilliance of our kids. And it's kind of like a misnomer in that a lot of general education teachers would presume that gifted teachers have it easy. Oh, you have it easy because you teach the gifted kids. I urge you all, if there's any way to do this at some point in your career, try to see if you can spend some time at your community's local juvenile detention center. And if you go to a juvenile detention center, I will guarantee you that you will see very clear examples of how we leave genius on the table. You will see brilliant kids that were never identified because you know what we suck at in education? And. We don't do good with and. So I was identified gifted at 7 years old by the grace of a paraprofessional that happened to observe me and know something about gifted programs because she had a child or a niece that was in a gifted program and talked to my mom about getting me out of that school so that I could have access, right? So when we start thinking about this and what this actually looked like, I thought I was identified with ADHD at 37 years old. So me being gifted and ADHD, they weren't having that. I was just a overactive, hyperactive Black boy looking for trouble who didn't know his place and was super disrespectful. If this Black woman who was my paraprofessional did not intervene on my behalf, I don't know what kind of education I would have had. But it very likely would have been a special education path at a point where special education was not a place that was going to lead to any sort of outcomes that would ensure I got an education. What if we actually said that instead of this conversation around our kids reaching their full potential, which is a super fixed notion of what we say their potential ought to be, we set the stage for excellence for all students? What if we said, you know what? Every single Title I school in the state of Colorado needs to have 100% of their teachers, if not fully GT certified, at least taking X number of hours of gifted and talented coursework. Why? Because I've never met a kid who does not benefit from gifted and talented pedagogy. So why in the world Wouldn't we use that to raise the bar? Have you seen a school improvement plan recently? Almost every school improvement plan. Rigor, engagement, more student-centered learning, more critical thinking. And I'm like, well, duh. Get your teachers to use more gifted strategies. If you do that, now all of a sudden, we're like, oh, wait, there are brilliant kids here. Who would have thunk it? You know, when I first started doing thinkLaw, the biggest shock was like when people were using this curriculum based off of real life legal cases and modifying their curriculum to have more critical thinking. Do you know what happened? Your straight A, high flying kids who were typically the high achievers that got tapped for those specialized learning programs, they struggled. You know who did really well? Your struggling learners. So the kids who like are, despite their best efforts, struggle academically, did really well with critical thinking. You know who did even better? Your behavior kids. The behavior kids became the rock stars. Well, why? Why? Well, it turned out that a lot of our straight A high flyers, they were good at compliance. They were good at memorizing the algorithms and doing exactly what you told them to do. Struggling learners, they had to look at things 17 different ways. They were used to being in the gray. They were used to the funk. A lot of our super high achievers, you give them information, they got it like that. Our struggling learners had to get to that process so they can explain how they got to this point, where a lot of our super high achievers didn't even know how they got to these different points. So they had a much harder time in the funk. My behavior kids, oh my goodness. I, as a former behavior kid, some might say I'm still a behavior kid, I always underachieved in school. I always did the bare minimum. I was smart, but didn't really try enough. I would be that kid who would like help somebody with their homework and not even do the homework myself because I just wasn't doing it. Didn't care, wasn't doing it. Law school changed everything. Law school, I graduated top of my class. What happened? Well, it turns out a whole lifetime of telling teachers, well, what had happened was actually turned out to be a benefit. I saw different angles. I had different perspectives. I knew how to think on my toes. And that's what really mattered when 100% of your grade was a 3-hour final with a whole bunch of crazy things in a scenario. So again, we can commit more deeper to not leaving genius on the table by having a much broader framework of what genius and brilliance looks like in gifted education. So some people talk about, oh, I don't know about these local norms. You're going to be watering down a program. Call stuff out for what it is. That's racist language. That's racist language. When you're saying watering down, what you're saying is, I don't believe that these kids can be gifted and poor, gifted and black, gifted and native, gifted and speak another language that isn't English as their first language because they're bilingual and they're emerging bilinguals or trilinguals who are honestly like so much living through this cognitive exercise of critical thinking every single day, but we're not giving them credit for that. We're going to pass on them because there's some single source of an exam saying they're not. Forget that. Brilliance exists in every single space, every single sector. You got brilliance on the res, you got brilliance in the hood, you got brilliance in the affluent communities. Like, I'm not trying to hear it, ever. We just got to commit to not leaving genius on the table. And what I look at is this deeper picture. I look at this idea of making sure that we're not just giving our kids the tools to like navigate the system. I want to go a little bit deeper. How do we get them to completely dismantle the system and build a new one? Well, they need critical thinking for that. They need more. They need other pieces. So we start looking at this idea around like, you know, we're losing our high flyers. And let's be real, we are losing high flyers. We got kids in elementary school, by the time they get to middle school, they're like, this is garbage. This is trash. And you know what? Can we call something out? Can we be clear that like when gifted learners go to high school, that is pretty dumb to all of a sudden start saying, okay, you're in high school, so now instead of like a real gifted program, you're gonna do harder, faster, more. Why? Why is that what we do? Harder, faster, more. What is that preparing me for? Harder, faster, more. How about deeper? How about more creative? How about more innovation? How about more like learner-centric? I'm not gonna sign up for that. You know, I had a teacher in 9th grade ask me to watch Gandhi and like do all these Gandhi, the 2 VHS set. I'm not watching that. Like, there's no way I'm gonna do that. Why are you gonna do that to me? That's like torture. Gandhi? Come on, man. I would spend 20 hours doing a project that was like something that I was really interested in. And Gandhi's a great man. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not watching a VHS double set of Gandhi. I'm sorry. And Karen brings in a really good point. And Corinne, you know, we're going to always leave genius on the table if we don't change the way we do our IB practices. But I want to dig a little bit deeper than that, though. I feel like your ability to unlock genius, to unlock excellence, to unlock brilliance shouldn't be limited to a district's ability to identify a kid with what this label is. Honestly, what I want to ask for and what I want to call for is a very different frame. Here's what I want to call for. I'm sure every one of your districts and school systems have something in your vision or mission statement about all students, right? We're going to do college and career readiness like for all students, critical thinking for all students, like civic-minded leaders for all students, right? But I think about this idea that, like, ultimately, if I had a magic wand as a teacher, what I would want to be able to do is I want 100% of my kids in my class to have an individualized education plan that challenges them to exceed whatever we think their potential is. So, like, what I'm asking for is a mind shift from the notion of all students to each student. Moving from all to each makes it so that I don't even care what I call you. And granted, like, I always care about equity, right? I always care about the outcome. And I think, you know, I believe very strongly in, you know, Dr. Donna Ford's, you know, analysis about the whole 20% inequity rule. Like, if your population of your gifted program deviates from the proportionality of your overall population by more than 20%, using the equal opportunity analysis from the EEOC out of the labor law cases, it can be presumed that systemic racism is at play. And you've got to address those issues so that those numbers fall more in line. It's not an exact quota. You got a 20% variance, right? So, like, Dr. Ford's saying, I mean, I think that's something we need to look at still, no matter what. But even if my parent has never heard about a gifted program, even if my parent refuses to sign my kid up for a gifted program for other reasons, I still should be in a position to get my brilliance unlocked. And this is where I'm like, man, as gifted advocates, we sometimes are doing ourselves a disservice by just having this conversation amongst gifted advocates, right? Like, I want to see more gifted educators at the Title I conferences. I want to make sure more gifted educators are leading sessions at, like, the ASCD curriculum development conferences, the superintendents and administrators conferences. Like, gifted education has to stop being the siloed issue because there's so much gifted and there that we get so much more buy-in. How many kids are choice exceptional that never get the gifted side of the identification? How many kids are ELLs that never get that gifted side of the identification? I know that's a huge issue in Colorado. So, like, this is kind of where I'm at with this, you know? Any other questions? Because I could just keep going. I could just keep going. So
we would love for you to go all night. There's so much good stuff here. It's so fun to hear and so much wisdom in what you're sharing. I think we could go all night, though our Zoom meeting might end. Are there any other questions? I don't see any on Facebook coming in right now. Do you see any on your side?
I do not. I see the points being made where people are kind of following up and agreeing with the silo point. So again, I want to invite you all again, if you haven't already seen, if you want to come out and attend my, so I'm dropping a link again for the Thinking Like a Lawyer book. And if you want to sign up for my session that I'm doing tomorrow, the book signing, I would love to have you all there. And again, if you text THINK to 66866, you can join our mailing list. So text THINK to 66866. You could join our mailing list. We'll be able to keep in touch and send you more information as we go. And I look forward to seeing a lot of you at the Colorado conference virtually in a few months. I see there's another question that's coming in, so we're going to wait for that one. In the meantime, please do check out our podcast. We have a really cool episode coming out tomorrow. There's a really good episode that just came out last week that actually features my daughter. My daughter is a very entertaining co-host, so come check that one out. But I really appreciate being able to spend the time with you. And for all the educators that are on here as well, please do also just check out our website for thinkLaw for your critical thinking needs for this year. We still do have some availability for back to school training and PD for any of you that are leading in districts and are looking for that. So just go to our website at thinklaw.us and then make sure that you make an idea to get there. So Jeanette brings up a really good point. Like, not all life is interesting. So we need to make sure that our kids get prepared for reality. True. But like, here's where I sometimes look at it and I'm like, all right, what does that look like though? Because even in reality, there's a lot of things that differ from the way that we typically do like our high school model. So like Jeanette's point is true, but I'll tell you a different point. When I was taking the bar exam, the lady that sat at the diagonal of me, it was her 13th time sitting for that exam. And I was like, please don't touch my papers. Like, I don't want none of your bad juju or whatever have you. But at the end of the day, she passed that time and they call her counselor. So like, tell me again why we don't let kids retake tests? Like, as a lawyer, right? Courts of laws, the law is legal. We got extensions all the time. And it wasn't for some like crazy reason, like, hey, you know what? I'm just so overwhelmed. I just need some more time. Like, you know what? Like my cousin is getting married. So I need to take some time. We'll just push it out a few more weeks. I'm like, all right, cool. And by law, like under the rules of professional conduct, attorneys were required to be super graceful and lenient when it came to extensions of deadlines. By law, by code, by regulation, we were supposed to be lenient and flexible. But like in education, we talk about, well, we got to get kids ready for the real world. But like in many ways in the real world, like I negotiate stuff all the time. Like I saw my mom negotiating rent payments and utility payments like all the time. Like we need to make sure that we understand that there's a piece to be played here. But also to your point, Jeanette, kids need to know that like everyone gets to a point where they don't feel like doing something. The difference between people that are super successful and people that are less successful is super successful people find a way to do it anyway. And I think that sort of thing of like, yo, it's part of playing the game. Like nobody loves what they're doing. That's an important message to communicate. But I also don't think that kids should abhor school and be bored all day, every day. It shouldn't feel like punishment to go to school. And I felt like all the way K-8, I couldn't wait to wake up in the morning. Then all of a sudden when I got to high school, I just stayed in the cafeteria all day. That's not right. Like that can't be all on me. Like they should have done maybe a little bit more to make that captivating for me. Okay. Recommend for equitable and inclusive ID processes, especially if they only rely on standardized and IQ tests for access. So there's ways to hack the system somewhat. I showed you those slides about the CAGT, right? I showed you that like parents of affluence, parents of know-how, they're prepping their kids for the CAGT. They're prepping their kids for these assessments. Like they're getting their separate psychological evaluation. They're doing all sorts of shenanigans. So like, let's not get it twisted. People are getting a leg up. So what could we do in our Title I schools between kinder and second to really change this conversation? What I say is, even if your district is still on a very narrow selection criteria, let's think about how we could do a better job with K-2 talent identification work, which is really talent development, is what I meant to say, talent development work. Our early elementary version of thinkLaw uses real life legal cases because we figure, fairy tales and nursery rhymes. Because we figure if kids are looking at something like Three Blind Mice and they're asking questions like, well, what are the hardships of being a blind mouse? Why might the blind mice be chasing after the farmer's wife? We can actually get our kids into the habit of thinking critically a lot earlier. Because if I'm honest with you, in a lot of Title I kindergarten classrooms that I observe, it's rigid, it's rule following, it's cute, but it's not necessarily a lot of critical thinking. It's not necessarily a lot of dialogue. So if you can create space for that critical thinking in kinder and first grade, and if you're in a city or district that has pre-K programming for your high poverty students, you could do that there too, then like you can start to kind of level the playing field a little bit when it comes to creating better outcomes. And just keep on lobbying and advocating, showing the data. And you know what? This is why I think the equity conversation is so important. Racial justice creates bizarre outcomes. So sometimes in the name of racial justice, We say things like, you know what, let's just eliminate all the gifted programs. I'm like, all right. So your idea of equity is everybody gets nothing. That doesn't make any sense. So let's make sure that we have an alternative, because that is what Seattle Public Schools was proposing. That's what New York City Public Schools was proposing. Like, what if we look at it differently and say, okay, our equitable plan for GT is to go deeper. We're going to go into those earlier grades. We're going to close the gifted gap before it starts by making sure that every single pre-K, kinder, first and second, or whatever you do before identifying is training gifted and talented teaching strategies, so that kids are getting exposed to gifted and talented teaching strategies. So that could help. I see a question here about private schools. You got this math circle. It's not truly equitable. You got parents working 2 jobs. They can't do it. How do you make it happen? How do you make it work? You know, I don't know. I don't know. I believe in some ways, not enough is something that we've become so normalized around, right? Like, it's kind of unfair that we're like, well, we'll figure it out. You know, you do more with less, and, you know, just get more scrappy with it. But I really, really don't know. What I always say, and a big part of why my work with thinkLaw has expanded to 35 states, is you got to speak their language. And this might be a helpful way to kind of like wrap up, because I know we're getting near to the end. Like, some schools really care about test scores and test scores only. Well, it turns out kids need critical thinking to do well on those tests. So, like, I have a whole workshop that I have that's called Hacking Test Prep with Critical Thinking. People are like, oh yeah, sign me up, because we want to get our test scores up. But like, I'm doing my little backdoor shenanigans. Some schools only care about classroom management. So I have a workshop that's called Critical Thinking as a key to classroom management. Oh yeah, our school culture needs to be improved, so we get there. Some schools really care about SEL, social emotional learning. It is important. But I don't think it's like, hey, kids, it's SEL time. No, I think it should be embedded as part of rigorous academic content. Because, again, if my kid is a brilliant person that graduates from Harvard with honors and goes to the meetings and says, well, technically, nobody gives a crap, right? Because they're socially inept. They're not going to even get a job if they're socially inept. So our kids need social emotional learning to be able to level up in life. So, like, we got to sort of figure out a way to kind of keep pushing forward for that. You know, I don't really know a lot of the landscape, Irene, around how that looks in Colorado, but, you know, good luck as you push, because that seems really, really important. When it comes about all, like, IEPs for all, how else we know they're moving forward? I mean, I'm with you. Like, how else would you know? Unless you actually have goals for every child. Like, I just don't know how much you would know. So we need to make sure that we keep on pushing. We need to make sure that we understand this idea that, like, every kid needs a push. Every kid needs to get their butt kicked. We need to just keep on going and going and going. And Karen, like, I read about Aurora Public Schools, and I don't know, I met an educator from Aurora Public Schools at NAGC in Albuquerque, and I was like fangirling her, like, damn, you go to Aurora Public Schools? Like, that's so, because I just think it's so impressive that you're able to be bold enough to do the things. And the thing that's crazy is, it's in the research. This isn't even like some random thing. It's in the research. So, you know, Miranda talked about this idea of eliminating honors courses to be more equitable. So that's kind of along the same line. Like, equity means everybody gets nothing. Well, we'll just do high quality instruction for everybody. All right. So how has that worked so far? How has that worked so far? Right? Like, it usually doesn't work. It usually doesn't work. So we don't question in special education that kids need intervention. And one of the things I really like, and I can't remember offhand Colorado's definition for gifted, but Nevada, which is typically ranked 49th or 50th in various education rankings around funding and other things, they had an interesting definition for gifted education that I really loved using. And it's something like, when a kid is at a level of intellectual, ability, such that the general classroom experience is a disservice to their learning outcomes, they need a specialized program. And I thought, like, that's the language. It's the idea that, like, it's actually a disservice. It's actually a disservice. So, like, if we start realizing, like, all right, differentiation, and you know what the real problem is, Miranda? Racism. The problem is racism. Because once you start talking about like tracking and whatever have you, and like differentiation is so hard, tracking, it's hard to imagine how that would be done in a non-racist way. I can tell you that like when I taught in DC one year, I taught two 7th grade sections. 2 of the classes were double block periods of a class called Math Review, and the other 2 sections were single class periods of pre-algebra. And the first thing I did is I talked to my principal. I said, listen to me, we can't call this class Math Review. It's just not going to work. I know that it's 7th grade. I know that these kids are at 3rd and 4th grade levels. But if it's called Math Review, these kids are going to all think that they're dumb, and that stigma is just not going to work. Can we just call it pre-algebra? And by the end of the year, if they can pass the pre-algebra assessment, they can kind of move forward with that, whatever. So like, whatever, who cares? And I remember, even though like we started the year doing basic math operations, although we were doing them rigorously, because let's be real, even intervention need not be remedial. Intervention can be higher order. It can be accelerated, super rigorous, super challenging intervention when it comes to catching kids up. And by the time the year ended, I'm not going to lie to you, because I had this narrow block of these kids in this area, they were well ahead. They were actually getting into the 2nd or 3rd chapter of Algebra 1 by the time the school year ended. So like this idea of permanent tracking is messed up, but the idea of narrowing the bands, again, these are not made up topics. There's been research that narrowing the bands actually helps, because differentiation is impossible. It's actually not just hard. It's impossible. If you want to give me a team of maybe 7 teachers at the same time, they teach 30-something kids of different levels, then fine, it's possible. But me and maybe 1 aide that comes in every once in a while, nope, not going to happen. All that's going to happen is kids' needs won't be met. And you know whose kids won't be met? The kids that'll be just fine. Kids that'll be just fine. We're always going to make them be the helper or go watch some blackboards, go help their kid. But if you care about equity, then you care about every kid being able to be challenged every day. And here's what we don't understand. And you know what? This might be my closing argument, okay? What do people care about? They care about the school to prison pipeline. Okay? They care about the achievement gap. They care about chronic absenteeism. But what if the school to prison pipeline, the achievement gap, chronic absenteeism, and the under-identification of Black and brown kids in gifted education are the same problem? What if it's the same problem? What if the solution to these stubborn problems was to commit broadly, systemically, to stop leaving genius on the table? That's the conversation we need to get. We need to make sure that our people that are out there pounding the pavement about this idea that, like, you know, school resource officers in our school actually isn't making Black and brown kids safer, then let's have the conversation around, okay, when is it going to start to be safe to be Black and gifted and brown and gifted and Native and gifted at the same time? When is it going to be safe to be seen? So I think that's it, man.
I like your closing argument. I think you summed it up well. I think that sometimes we do focus on the wrong things, and we are leaving too much on the table, and we need to think about our systems differently. If you had some deep thoughts like I did over the last hour, or had a lot of fun with Colin, please register to come to our conference in October. See some more of him. We're so excited that he has agreed to join us. In the meantime, pick up his book, Thinking Like a Lawyer. Follow him on Twitter. Sign up for those emails. Go to his book signing tomorrow. Register. It's free, right, Colin? Free. Everyone likes free.
Yeah, come check it out. Again, we've got the information right here. So thank you all so much. Please do check out our website and register. Buy the book as well, show support. If you want to buy bulk copies for your district or different organization that you're a part of, please go do that from the website, and we can kind of hook you up and make sure you get some good prices for that and free shipping as well. So thank you all so much. I do appreciate you all. Look forward to keeping in touch. Hopefully some of you will be there tomorrow. And keep up the great work. And again, any questions you have for me, please feel free to email me, Colin@thinkLaw.us. Thank you all so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Colin. Just a quick plug for Conversations with CAGT next week. We have our local Dr. Jessica Howard joining us. Her session is entitled #Helping Teens Help Themselves. Also a very, very timely topic. As parents and educators, we try to help our teens navigate their ever-changing world by supporting them through change. What happens when we as adults are uncertain of what the future looks like, which is kind of where we are right now in our world. So join us next week. Thank you so much, Colin. We had a ton of fun, learned a lot, some deep thoughts to walk away with, and we'll see you in October.
All right. Sounds great.
Thank
Thank you so much.
See you next week.